The insistent ringing pierced through Detective Samantha Cho's sleep. 3 in the morning. Her hand instinctively reached for the phone, her mind still shrouded in the remnants of a dream. Detective Cho, she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. The voice on the other end was urgent, clipped. Homicide, Korean consulate official, you're needed at the scene. Cho was instantly awake, the weight of the words settled in, pushing away the last vestiges of sleep. This was no ordinary homicide. Cho quickly got dressed. The city was still asleep, cloaked in an eerie silence that belied the chaos that was about to unfold. The flashing lights of her cruiser sliced through the darkness as she navigated the empty streets, the phone call replaying in her head. A Korean consulate official, murdered. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information. Who would target such a high-profile individual, and why? The questions hung heavy in the air, a grim prelude to the scene she was about to encounter. The air was thick with the smell of rain and something else, something metallic and sharp. The flashing lights of a dozen police vehicles illuminated the scene. A stately home in the affluent suburbs, its facade now marred by the presence of death. Uniformed officers swarmed around the property, their faces grim masks in the harsh glare. Cho stepped out of her cruiser, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the scene. This was not going to be easy. Detective Cho, a young officer, his face pale and tight with tension, approached her. The victim's inside. Captain wants to see you. Cho nodded, her gaze sweeping over the scene one last time before she entered the house. The air inside was colder, heavier, as if the very walls were absorbing the shock of the violent act that had transpired within. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what awaited her. She had a job to do, a life to investigate, a killer to find. The interior of the house was a study in contrasts. Opulence and violence. Expensive artwork adorned the walls, jarringly juxtaposed against the stark reality of the crime scene. Cho made her way through the house, her eyes missing nothing. The living room was in disarray, furniture overturned, suggesting a struggle. She paused, noting the shattered glass of a picture frame, the scattered photographs a testament to a life interrupted. The victim, Jae-Hoon Park, lay in his study, slumped over his antique desk. A single bullet wound marred his temple, a crimson stain blooming on the polished wood beneath his head. His eyes, wide and unseeing, stared vacantly at the ceiling. The room itself was meticulously organized, a stark contrast to the chaotic scene in the living room. Books lined the shelves, each one perfectly aligned, a sense of orderliness that only amplified the chilling randomness of death. Cho crouched beside the body, her gaze clinical as she examined the scene. The killer had been professional, efficient, one shot, no hesitation, no passion, just cold, calculated execution. It wasn't a random act of violence, this was personal. The way the scene was staged, the lack of forced entry, it all pointed to someone who knew the victim, someone who had been granted access. The medical examiner, a tall, lanky man with tired eyes, arrived at her side. Single gunshot wound to the head, he confirmed, his voice low and professional. Time of death, approximately between midnight and 2 in the morning. I'll know more after the autopsy. Cho nodded, absorbing the information. She rose to her feet, her gaze sweeping over the study once more. The room was silent, the air thick with the weight of death, but beneath the silence, Cho could almost hear it. A faint whisper of secrets, a promise of answers yet to be revealed. Jae-Hoon Park was more than just a consulate official. He was a pillar of the Korean-American community. Respected, admired, his loss was a blow that resonated far beyond the confines of his home. Cho had met him on a few occasions at community events. He was always impeccably dressed, his demeanor calm and dignified, a hint of sadness always lingering in his eyes. What secrets did he hold? What demons haunted him? Park had dedicated his life to bridging the gap between his homeland and his adopted country. He was instrumental in establishing cultural exchange programs, tirelessly working to foster understanding and cooperation between the two nations. He was a man of peace, a diplomat in the truest sense of the word. His murder sent shockwaves through the community, leaving behind a void that would be difficult, if not impossible, to fill. News of his death spread like wildfire, each headline a fresh wave of grief and disbelief. The Korean-American community was reeling, their sense of security shattered by this senseless act of violence. Who would want to kill a man like Jae-Hoon Park? What could possibly be the motive behind such a heinous crime? The questions echoed through the community, fueling a growing sense of fear and uncertainty. Cho felt the weight of their grief, their fear pressing down on her. She knew that this case was about more than just solving a murder. It was about bringing justice to a community that had lost one of its own. She had a responsibility to find the truth, not just for Jae-Hoon Park, but for all those who mourned his loss. The pressure was immense, but Cho was determined. She would find the killer no matter the cost. The Park family was devastated. Jae-Hoon's wife, Mi-cha, was a picture of quiet grief, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale and drawn. Their son, Jun-seo, a college student, seemed lost, his youthful features etched with shock and disbelief. The pain of their loss was palpable, a tangible presence that filled the room. Cho watched them, her heart heavy with sympathy, as they struggled to come to terms with the reality of their loss. The language barrier proved to be an immediate obstacle. Mi-cha spoke limited English, and Jun-seo, though fluent, was too overwhelmed with grief to be of much help. Cho requested a Korean-speaking officer to assist with the interview, but the cultural barrier ran deeper than just language. There was a hesitancy, a reluctance to divulge information that spoke of a deep-rooted cultural deference to authority. Cho understood their reticence. In Korean culture, family matters were often kept private, shielded from the prying eyes of outsiders. To speak ill of the dead, even to assist in the investigation of their murder, was considered taboo. Cho knew that she would have to tread carefully, respecting their cultural sensitivities, while at the same time trying to uncover the truth. The interview was a slow, painful process. Mi-cha, her voice barely a whisper, spoke of her husband with reverence, painting a picture of a devoted family man, a respected community leader. Jun-seo, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance, offered little, his silence speaking volumes. Cho listened patiently, searching for any clue, any detail that could shed light on the motive behind Jae-Hoon Park's murder. She knew that the answers lay somewhere within the walls of that house, hidden behind the veil of their grief and their silence. As Cho delved deeper into Jae-Hoon Park's life, a pattern of threats began to emerge. Anonymous letters, phone calls, whispers of discontent from within the Korean community. It seemed that Park's diplomatic approach had not sat well with everyone. There were those who felt he was too accommodating to the West, that he was betraying his Korean heritage. The threats, initially dismissed as the work of a disgruntled few, took on a more sinister tone in light of Park's murder. Cho scrutinized each piece of evidence, each cryptic message, searching for a connection, a clue that would lead her to the killer. The letters were filled with vitriol, accusing Park of being a traitor, a puppet of the West. The phone calls were chilling in their silence, the heavy breathing on the other end conveying a menace that transcended words. The Korean community, once eager to cooperate, now clammed up, fear replacing their initial grief. Cho understood their fear. They had lost one of their own, and now the killer was still out there, lurking in the shadows. The cultural barrier, once a hurdle, was now a wall, effectively isolating Cho from the very people who could help her solve the case. The pressure mounted with each passing day. The media, sensing a story, descended upon the community, their cameras capturing every tear, every whispered accusation. Cho knew that time was running out. She had to find a way to break through the wall of silence, to gain the trust of the community before fear completely consumed them. She needed to find the person or persons responsible for Jae-Hoon Park's death before they could strike again.